Hi, everyone. I'm excited to have Casia Schreyer on the podcast today. Casia is a freelance writer, editor, and novelist. She writes fantasy romance, as well as sci-fi, and probably other genres. On top of that, with the benefit of her BA in English, she also works with other authors, helping them with their books, with things like helping them beta read through, but all the way to doing a full content editing if that's what they want. So, which is awesome. Very busy gal. She also has a husband and two beautiful children and lives on the Canadian prairies. So, how exciting! And you can find her at casiaschreyer.wordpress.com. So, so good to have you here, Casia.
Thank you for having me today.
Yeah. So this is fun. We met sort of quickly, I guess you could say, in
Yeah.
August at the Calgary When Words Collide Writers Conference, and you were on a panel. Actually, I had the privilege of you were on a panel. I think with three other authors. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were four of us.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you were kind of each had sort of a different take on because we're talking about writing in cross-genre books and self-publishing. And I definitely appreciate you taking the time to do this. You got busy enough things going on with with
Oh,
writing
yeah.
and yeah, all that. So, and with family and stuff. Let's kind of get started into the questions. Would you share your story, how you got started writing, and maybe author mentors who influenced and inspired you to get started writing and then self-publishing?
My very first book was inspired by my cousin's journey with her suicide attempt and her self-harm.
Oh, okay.
And um, I really felt like there wasn't much I could do. And what I do best is write. So I ended up writing a book about a girl very much like my cousin who hits rock bottom, but that doesn't define her. She gets to move past that. She gets to survive. And I wanted it to have that hopeful ending so that, I guess because I needed to believe my cousin could survive.
Mm-hmm.
And I gave her a copy of it when it came out, and she was, we were both really happy with how it came out, and sort of that started my journey with publishing and writing professionally.
Wow, that's awesome. I mean, tragic's beginning, but sometimes
Yeah,
we don't know what's going to inspire us, right, to start writing. Yeah.
yeah, and it's sort of, I'm the sort of person that reads almost exclusively fantasy, science fiction, paranormal, and then to turn around and have my first book be contemporary lit. This wasn't something that I ever imagined myself writing.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's an incredible story. Um, from there, so with that book, you self-published it, did you?
Yes, I
Yeah.
self-published that book, more because it was time-sensitive material. The
Okay.
whole idea of the bullying and the street harassment and things that were happening in the book were very prominent in the news and in social media
Yeah.
when I finished writing. And I knew it would take at least 18 months, at least, to get it published somewhere.
Yeah.
And it was like, well, by that time, the whole focus has been moved to another topic.
Yeah.
I really wanted it out there when people were looking for information and stories about these topics.
Yeah. Yeah. Sort of strike when the iron's hot kind of
Yeah.
deal. Yeah.
that-
That's very intuitive of you. That's great. Yeah. So then from there, you continued to write. And so what was your journey? You wrote, because you've written fantasy and sci-fi too,
Yeah,
right?
my next book ended up being the first book in a light fantasy romance series. And again, I'm not a big romance reader, but it just, that's how the story sort of turned out. And I really wanted to take the whole princess trope and play with it a little bit. And I ended up with this light fantasy coming of age romance. And the series is really focusing on being strong without having to be a mother or a warrior.
Yeah.
So the main characters, there will be 5, only 2 have come out so far. Each one has to find her strength, what makes her a strong ruler and a strong person, without falling back on those 2 tropes that you see in romance, where she's either going to swing a sword or be the big, strong mama bear character.
Yeah.
There, and then it was like, well, I've got that series going, and then I had an idea for another contemporary lit, which ended up being Pieces, and then book 2 came out, and then I realized that with my local authors group, we sort of had a hole in what our books covered, and so I ended up starting a middle grade science fiction adventure series, and because I didn't have enough to do already.
No, exactly.
So currently I'm bouncing between the science fiction and the light fantasy romance.
Wow, that's great. So which ones would you say are your favorite genres to write in?
I'm definitely still a speculative fiction kind of person. I like the fantasy and the science fiction, and I'm not picky. My fantasy tends to be sword and sorcery, epic fantasy. I don't write a lot of urban fantasy. But my science fiction is all over the place. I'm working on a short story that takes place on a spaceship. But the series that I'm writing is more of a near future dystopian with a really weird twist.
Oh, wow. I love dystopian, actually. It's one of my favorites to read. Awesome. I'll have to pick that up when you finish that. That's awesome. Well, so that's great that you are able to, write across all these different genres. And, and more amazing is that you're able to juggle them because that's tricky.
Yeah. Yeah, I found I was editing the fantasy while I was trying to write the first draft of book 2 in the science fiction. And my science fiction characters, who are near future teenagers, kept sounding like medieval peasants, and I'm like, this isn't working.
No.
Somehow, because I'm reading this sort of medieval flavored dialogue in the fantasy, and then that sound is transitioning into the science fiction, which is supposed to have a more modern feel in the dialogue. So it was like, okay, put the draft aside, finish the editing, meet the deadline, then write, because apparently I was done. I couldn't do both anymore.
Wow. Well, but good for you though for continuing to plow through that. I mean, that's great. Would you share? Do you have ways that you keep the story straight, especially when you're working on one? Like, maybe you have different stages, like you were just saying. So editing one, maybe you're editing one, and you're beginning the next story in another series. Like, how do you do that?
I am a compulsive outliner and note taker.
Yeah.
So I will have timelines and things like that. I have a list taped to my wall above my desk with character names on it so that I can keep all the spelling consistent, and so I don't end up having a James in this series and a James in that series, because that's to get confusing, right?
Yeah.
There are names that I just like. Like, I've already used that name, I keep a lot of lists, and I tend to do a lot of brainstorming. So I'm working on fine-tuning the outline for book 3 of the fantasy while I'm writing book 3 of the science fiction. So when I hit that roadblock where it's like, okay, the draft that I'm writing is dragging and I need to just walk away for a minute, then I'll sit down and I'll work on outlining, on figuring out characters and things like that for another project until I come back to it. But actually writing both at the same time starts to get pretty difficult. My characters all start to talk like each other. And
Yeah. No, I could see that because, they're kind of living in your head, right?
Yeah, and it's... I don't need the princesses from this fantasy island talking to the teenagers in this underground megacity, and it's like, no, you guys exist in two totally different worlds, you know, like.
That's a great tip for writers who are listening to, have something nearby, like on their wall or whatever, but like the names of the characters. Do you even do like a setting? Like, do you do,
I have a map
yeah,
for the Rose Garden books, more so I can keep things like travel times
yeah,
straight. Like, okay, how many days is it going to take them to get somewhere, or for a letter to get somewhere?
right.
I also have character lists or calendars or timelines or whatever. It's different for each story depending on sort of what I need for each story. With the science fiction, there's a lot less travel and messages are instantaneous. They've all got smartphones and computers and everything. So I don't have to worry so much about keeping the timeline even, except for it's middle grade. So it's like, well, what days are they in school? I have to keep track of the weekends.
Yeah.
Or you don't have to do that for the fantasy at all. It doesn't matter what day of the week it is.
Yeah. I was talking with another author who says she's often like in the brainstorming stage on one, and then like she writes romance, but she writes, so then she'd be writing like a Regency, but then she would switch if she seemed like she couldn't think of a new idea for that one, then she would switch right away to like I think it's like Western historical romance. So then she'd switch. Do you do that in your days? Like in say the same day? Do you switch?
Yes, I've worked on multiple projects in the same day. Even trying to write them. I find that is a really huge thing. If you're hitting a roadblock on one project, just switch gears.
Yeah.
It's something else will catch your fancy. Yeah. I often have a lot of these short projects, short stories for different things where it's like, okay, I just need to work on something that's not this big, deep, involved project. And
yeah,
you're taking a break, but at the same time, you're still producing something.
Yeah.
A lot of writers are like, well, I have writer's block and I haven't written anything for 3 days. And it's like, well, I never get that, because if I have writer's block on this project, well, I just work on another project for 3 days. So yeah.
I was going to ask you, for writers that are listening who write in different genres, what are your, biggest tips for, when they're writing different genres, how they can be the most productive doing that? I mean, we probably mentioned one, like having the charts and because it keeps you organized.
Yeah, the chart keep you organized. Something I do a lot, because I write all my first drafts by hand, because I'm slightly crazy. I'm not always sitting where my notes are. And so I'll write, like Jeffrey, last name, and I'll just keep going. Don't waste the time trying to find your notes. Don't waste the time flipping back looking for these details. Just put a filler in. In my first draft, everybody is just last name, last name, last name. And then when I go and actually type that draft into the computer, then I make notes who has which last name and make sure it's all consistent. But first draft, you just get it down. And if you can't remember it, you put something in to hold the place.
Yeah.
Make a note for yourself and keep going.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good, because that keeps the flow, right? That keeps...
Right. You don't want to break that creative flow having to go back and look at things. I also like writing by hand because it stops me from going back and compulsively editing. As I'm working, I don't scroll back up and make changes. All I can do is like I'll go back and I'll circle a section and just write rework, because I'll read it over to get my place and go, oh, that's really awkward. It doesn't quite fit. But okay, rework. Let's save it for the next draft, and I just keep going.
Yeah.
Or I'll run a highlighter over something because I'm not sure if the details are right. So I'll highlight it and just write double check and keep going.
Yeah.
And so I don't end up breaking that creative flow as I'm writing.
Yeah. Do you have maybe certain times of the day that you write, or is it just kind of whenever you have free time, or I don't know? And do you write in like how many words per day, or do you write in scenes? Like some writers say, well, okay, I'm just going to write this scene today. other writers say, oh, well, I'm gonna get like, 2,000 words done today or 1,000 words done today. I don't know. Do you do any of that or no?
When I'm working freelance, I definitely have to meet word goals because I have somebody waiting for it on a deadline.
Right.
When I'm working on my stuff, it's sort of as much time as I have to put into it.
Yeah.
I'm lucky. I'm a work from home mom, and both of my kids are in school full time now. So they get on the bus, and I basically have 6 hours at home to work on it. Now, my husband works afternoons, so he's home for most of that 6 hours too. So, I have to juggle having lunch with him and things like that. But for the most part, it's just balancing, answering my emails and stuff and actually sitting down and writing. And
yeah.
So to be honest, I think I did more work when I had my kids home with me and I was scrambling to get it all done during nap time or all done during that afternoon movie.
Yeah.
As opposed to, it's like, now I've got 6 hours and I'm just like, no motivation to actually sit down and get it done.
Yeah. Well, there is something about having a rigid, I get that, a rigid time block or whatever.
Used to, you put the little one down for the nap, the older one went in front of the TV, and if you didn't meet your word count before the little one started yelling, that's it. You didn't do anything else for the rest of the day.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's that's harder when you have kids, right? Because you got to juggle everything, right? But good for you. And there's probably a lot of moms listening that are also writing and trying to figure that out. So yeah, no, that's great. Those are great tips.
Use nap time.
Yeah.
When you can, use nap time.
Yeah. Well, that's good. So sort of transitioning a little, do you find that it's tough to juggle the marketing for each genre? For example, do you have some readers who read all your novels across all the genres, or is there very little crossover from, say, your fantasy to your because you've written women's lit and you've also written
I've got 2 contemporary lit,
yeah,
and they both deal with like current teen issues.
Okay.
And then I've got the light fantasy romance,
yeah,
which is teen adult, but I always say there's nothing in those books that a 12-year-old really couldn't read.
Yeah.
But then the science fiction, not only is it a different genre, but it's for middle grade. So it's written for like grade 4 to 9.
Yeah.
So I don't get a lot of crossover between the novels and the science fiction because of the age gap in them. A lot of the readers, they look at them and go, well, yeah, but it's for like 4th graders, it's going to be too fast to read for me. But I find that, like, for myself, I read across speculative fiction. Yeah. So I'll fantasy, I'll read urban fantasy, I'll read dystopian, I'll read space operas, I'll read science fiction, all of it. It's all sort of just all speculative fiction. And I think a lot of speculative fiction writers, or readers rather, have their favorite, but will read across all those sort of speculative subgenres.
Yeah.
So I think authors shouldn't be afraid of having to pigeonhole themselves. To be able to say, well, it's fantasy, but it's sort of dark goth horror fantasy is like, yeah, well, everybody who reads horror, fantasy, bizarro, they're all going to pick it up because something about it will appeal to them. Yeah. And you don't have to worry about pigeonhole marketing so much when you write speculative fiction.
Yeah. Sort of still talking a little bit about marketing, but would you share some of your tips on what you've found works well when you are marketing more than one genre? Like, for example, do you survey your readers somehow? Or do you have like a specific email list for each genre, that sort of thing? I
pick my email up by age group.
Okay.
So I ask people, are you interested in getting information about my children's picture books?
Yeah.
Middle grade, YA, NA, or strictly adult sort of thing. And I break it up that way. So when I have a book coming out that's teen adult, I target my YA list and my adult list. And when I've got a new middle grade coming out, I'll target the people who are interested in those younger books. maybe they have kids that age, they're looking for books for them. I find that because I write across ages as well as genres, I don't want to send these fantasy novels to somebody who's looking for books for their kids.
Right.
And I don't want to send middle grade science fiction to a 20-something-year-old reader who's into science fiction but is way out of the age group and doesn't have kids.
Yeah. So how do you do that? Do you just do that on your website? Like you'll say, well, if you're interested in like middle grade for your kids to read, you can sign up here. If you're interested in fantasy, you can sign up here. Or do you do that in your email list and
when you click on the link to sign up for my email list, it has the information, first name, last name, email address, and then it has a bunch of tick boxes. Select which ones of these you're interested in.
Oh, that's good.
So then you can just click off, I'm interested in children's books and middle grade, or I'm interested in YA and adults. And I have one more on there that says submission information. So if you're interested in when Schreyer Ink Publishing has an open reading period for something, you can click off the submissions box and you'll get updates whenever a new reading period for the anthologies opens up.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. So tell me a little bit more about that. Now I'm curious. The anthologies?
The anthologies has been a very big project. It started as a short story. I had this idea for a short story and nowhere to put it. No idea what to do with it. So I put out an open call through Schreyer Ink Publishing, which basically just publishes all of my books. And for books or for short stories on gender, race, religion, matters of tolerance and intolerance. And we put out our first anthology called Open Minds, and it has 6 stories in it. And one of them was this story that I had kicking around that I just didn't know what to do with. So then we were like, hey, this worked. And so we put out an open call for stories dealing with madness.
Okay.
And we are publishing, we published Volume 1 of Twilight Madhouse over the summer. Volume 2 is coming out in November, and Volume 3 is coming out in December. We had over 120 submissions come in for this. So we're doing 3 volumes because they were just so good, these stories.
Oh, that's great.
So they're all short stories dealing with madness and with opposites and with gray areas and twisty surprises. And they were a lot of fun to work with.
Yeah.
Wow. Now we have a whole schedule set for next year. We're going to be doing 6 different anthologies next year. Next fall, we'll be doing Volume 4 of Twilight Madhouse. But in the meanwhile, we're doing one on classic fantasy, so like enchanted swords and barbarian wars and all these things. And we're doing one on classic science fiction, so like First Contact stories and First Steps on an Alien Planet, and
awesome!
really classic. Like we're going with a 1950s Flash Gordon style cover, and it's going to be a lot of fun. We're really going retro with it. We're doing one for Canadian authors on mythical creatures in Canada.
Okay.
So
that sounds fun.
Yes, we're expecting like Wendigo stories and Ogopogo and things like that.
Yeah.
But also looking for that leprechaun running a pub in Toronto, or fairies who are in trouble, or because their ley lines are being buried under an intersection, or just it could be set in pioneer times or Native American, sort of pre-Europe, or urban fantasy. And the creatures can be from any tradition as long as the story takes place in Canada and it's written by a Canadian author.
Oh,
so
I'm
kind of looking forward to that one. It'll be a lot of fun. And we're doing a young authors one for authors 13 to 19 who would like to go through the submission process, sort of learn how to submit stories, and we'll be selecting 8 stories. The theme for that one is looking ahead. So instead of setting a genre, we've actually set a year. The stories have to take place between this year and this year. I think it's something 2038 and 2068 or something like that.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
The story has to take place sort of in that time frame. And so it sort of allows these young writers to look ahead to what the world will be like when they're in their 30s, 40s, sort of thing.
Yeah.
But all the authors have to be between 13 and 19. And so we're kind of excited to see what kind of new talent is out there trying to get published.
Oh, that just sounds like so much fun. And people probably love it. They get their stories published in an anthology.
There's still a huge market among authors for reliable short story platforms. And I think that the short story is so underappreciated.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just so perfect for this culture of commuting,
Yeah.
You just read one story on the bus or on the train on your way to work in the morning, and you get to read another one on your way home.
Yeah.
For busy people who are like, well, I only have like half an hour to read every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Well, every time you open the book, you're reading a new story. You don't have to remember where you left off or what's happening to the characters, because each time you sit down, you get a completely new story.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, I would agree, because I actually really appreciate short stories too, and you can finish it it doesn't take 2 days, 3 days to read. So,
Right, and I think they're just such an underappreciated art form.
Yeah.
We've gotten some very beautiful stories where the story is complete and it's interesting and it's compelling and the language is amazing, and they do it all in under 10,000 words. And it's like, I have trouble crafting something this beautiful, and I've got like 50, 60,000 words, and here these people are doing it in under 10,000.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is an art form all its own, and it deserves to be published and read and celebrated.
Yeah. It's so fun that you're doing that. Would you share, since you're a self-published author, do you find that you have more creative control in your writing, your book cover design, your overall marketing strategies, that sort of thing?
For creative control and design, absolutely. I get to do this from the ground up. There was a huge learning curve trying to figure out how to do table of contents and interior layout and the margins and everything. But I've got 4 novels, 2 novellas, a cookbook. I've done it enough times now that I know where I'm going and what I'm doing to get everything laid out. Covers, I have a really great team, a couple of photographers and graphic designers who help me do all of the cover work. And it's really nice to be able to sort of sit down and bounce ideas off of people. And, as a fellow creative, it's like I understand and I try to be a really good client.
Yes.
But when we did the cover for Pieces, I think we did 5 different mock-ups and none of them were working.
Okay.
And my sister was supposed to do the cover for that one. I drove her up the wall. I was just those nightmare graphic design client that they like to write angry Twitter feeds about. Like, it was bad. I had no clue what I wanted, and everything that I suggested just didn't work, and everything she tried wasn't what I wanted. And we finally hit on this idea. So at one point in the story, the main character gets a framed picture from her sister for Christmas.
Yeah.
And it's sort of the selfie, the arms over each other's shoulders, selfie sort of picture. But then at one point in the story, the frame gets broken. It gets knocked on the floor.
Oh, okay.
So I thought, okay, contacted my photographer friend. I said, look, you got a picture of like 2 teenage girls who are sisters or who look like they could be sisters, sort of in this pose, close up of the 2 faces together.
Yeah.
Send me the picture.
Yeah.
I was going to put it in a frame and smash it and take a picture of that and send the picture of the smashed frame to my sister to do the cover. And he ended up sending me this picture, and it's just like a close-up. This half of one girl, this half of the other girl, sort of cheek to cheek.
Yeah.
With this like broken glass, overlay on it and the title and everything. And my sister and I were looking at it and she's like, damn it, that's the cover. That's it. He got it. Go with that one. I'm not going to be able to top it. And I was just like, we spent months. I think we spent as much time working on that cover as I spent writing the book.
Yeah. Wow.
And then it just happened by accident as we were coming down to the deadline. And it was just, I know that if that had gone to a traditional publisher, they would have gone somewhere totally different with it. And it would have been like, here's the cover. And I would have just been left going, oh, okay,
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, to be able to sit there and drive graphic designers crazy, trying to get a cover made was certainly a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But what I'm doing myself is basically the same thing that these big companies are asking new authors to do.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
A lot of companies expect you to regularly update all your social media and do local book signings and do online book launches and all these things yourself to drum up an audience for the book. So
yeah, so I mean, as a self-published author, you're able to do that, on your own, right? And stuff. It is a bit of a learning curve, right?
It is, and right now we're trying to figure out distribution. How do we get our books now off of my table at a street fair or a farmer's market and actually into the stores?
Yeah.
So we're working on taking that next step now with the books. And if I was traditionally published, well, they would take care of that for me. It would already be in the stores, but. Now this is my next learning curve, getting the books into the stores and figuring this out. And
no, and that's good. I mean, there are stores that do both, like bookstores that do indie authors and and traditionally, so I guess in different regions. So I guess you'd have to see, but
it's a lot of footwork, going to stores, talking to managers, sending emails. One of the other authors at When Words Collide jotted down the name of a distributor that her small publisher uses to get her books into stores. So we're looking at what sort of cost is involved with that, and markups and markdowns. And
what would you say are the biggest benefits, like what you've experienced with being a self-published author and doing kind of things where you have more creative control?
Well, never having been traditionally published, I can't compare it to that, but I compare it to my freelancing work. I do some ghostwriting, and it's like, here, you need to write me a story about this type of male lead and this type of female lead, and they're in this sort of situation, and it has this type of paranormal creatures, and this is the city it's going to take place in, and you're just like, well, why don't you just write it? Like, you've got everything here, Whereas when I do it myself, I'm not worrying about metadata and keywords and, and polling my audience ahead of time to see what they want. And, I'm writing stories that interest me. Yeah. And I'm hoping that the interest and my passion for these stories will come across in the writing and will make them interesting to the readers.
Yeah.
Because I can't imagine having somebody over my shoulder going, sorry, you can't write about this type of character because it's not popular right now, and you need to include a character of a specific minority so that we can market it over here, and it's like, no, let me just tell my story, and I'll take care of the rest later.
No, that totally makes sense. And it probably, do you find that it gives you more freedom even in the writing process, even as you're writing, because you don't have to worry about...
I don't have to worry about how I'm going to market it until it's done. I don't have to worry about the deadline until I get to like the second or third draft, and then I go, okay, now I sort of know when it'll be done. Now I can set a publication date.
Yeah.
I don't have to worry about the publisher sitting there going, is it done yet? Is it done yet? Is it done yet? That would drive me crazy. Being independent certainly gives me the freedom to do things like read at the local schools and volunteer with my kids' classrooms for different things, and do a lot of these local events. We go to a lot of street fairs and farmers markets, and you don't get a lot of book sales, but you we're really generating interest in local talent, in local authors, and
Yeah.
like a $10 table at a farmer's market is a lot cheaper than taking an ad out in a newspaper. And
Yes, that's true. Yeah, so I can totally see big benefits there. And besides that, then the community's kind of getting to know you too, right?
yes, being indie is a lot about making very personal connections, interacting with people, interacting with readers and other writers,
Yeah.
and building these friendships across places, building this recognizability of who you are,
Yeah.
because people are really going to buy your book, take the chance on you
Yeah.
if they know you, if they recognize you,
Yeah.
because it's a huge market. Huge, there's so many books being released, and
Yeah. No, that's true. Still the biggest, reason that people buy books is word of mouth. Somewhere,
oh yeah,
somewhere, it,
yeah.
they were told about your book, right?
And I've
Yeah.
been really focusing over the summer on doing reviews. I'm really focusing on other indie writers, and getting their books read and reviewed, and nice long reviews on the blog. So because people who know me, know what I'm interested in, are going to look at that and go, well, I like other books. I've had conversations with her about books we both enjoy.
Yeah.
If she liked this book, maybe I will too.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's good. And on top of that, that's also helpful for the authors too, right? So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's good.
I think networking between indies is really the strongest form of marketing that we have,
Yeah.
to do these honest reviews for each other. And, like I read one where really I was like, this really is not my thing, and like I can't honestly give it more than 2 stars. And I ended up having a conversation with her about it instead of just posting this bad review. Turned out I totally misunderstood. The books I was reviewing were abridged previews. So I was getting only like, each book was like, I'd read like 5 books, and this was only going to be like half of the novel. And so I was missing huge chunks. I was like, okay, now I get it. Hold on, let me go back and rewrite this review so it's actually about what you're doing. And got to write this whole article on how she was writing these, like 99-cent abridged previews,
Yeah.
to drum up interest in this book that was going to be coming out. And it was like, if I had been a big reviewer, well, she would have gotten this awful review plastered everywhere. But because we had this relationship, we could talk about it and figure out where this miscommunication was happening. And so I was able to sort of rewrite the review to reflect what the project was actually about.
Yeah. I've found that too in the indie author world. People are very, wanting to connect with each other, wanting to help each other. I've found it's very positive, which is wonderful, right?
It is.
Yeah.
Part.
What are your top 3 pieces of advice for indie authors who are just starting out? Maybe it's advice you wish you would have had starting out, or maybe it's something you've seen other authors struggle with. What would be your top 3 pieces of advice?
Ask for recommendations. My first collection of short stories came out from one print-on-demand company, and the binding was awful. We had pages falling out and stuff like that, and then eventually they're now out of print. They've been re-released all in one collection, and now printing through CreateSpace, where we don't have issues at all with the quality. So, just because something's coming up in the top 5 hits on a search engine, ask. Go to different writing groups and ask what different people's experiences are with the quality, the customer service. For any publisher, before you sign a contract with somebody, ask around. Has anybody had any bad run-ins with these places? There are, with the indie market exploding, there are a lot of places that you have to avoid. So that's number 1. Ask for recommendations before you start doing business with anybody. Yeah. Number 2, it's going to cost a little bit of money up front to go indie.
Yeah.
Get the editor, get the proofreader, get the beta readers, get a professional cover done.
Yeah.
It makes a huge difference when you're trying to stand out from the 3,000 plus books that are published daily online. That is really, really big. And I guess my last one is have fun. As an indie, you have complete creative control. So try really weird things. I'm editing right now Twilight Madhouse Volume 3. I've got this wonderful story in there where he's basically looping this story back and forth on top of itself and playing with the time-space continuum. And it's just, I'm not sure that a big house would take a chance on a story like this, but it is so intricate and beautiful. And it's like, go and play with physics itself.
Yes.
Play with the words, play with the format of the story on the page. Not everything you try is going to work, but try it. You know, like at some point you're going to hit on something that nobody else has hit on yet, and it's just going to soar.
Yeah.
So you've got complete creative control. Go nuts with it. Keep trying stuff and never, ever self-reject.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. Wow. Lots of excellent tips there. I just appreciate you taking the time, Casia, today to share. If you could let writers and readers know who are listening, what projects, books you have on the go right now, and then also if you can let them know where they can find you online, that'd be awesome.
Okay, well, if you go to Amazon.com, I'm on Author Central there under Casia Schreyer, so it's got a list of all my available books. Right now, that's 2 contemporary lit, the first 2 books in the light fantasy romance, and the first 2 books in the middle grade sci-fi.
Yeah.
We're hoping to have book 3 in the middle grade science fiction done by the end of the year.
Yeah.
And then next spring, book 3 in the light fantasy romance will be coming out. And that one I'm really looking forward to, because book 1 and book 2 sort of follow this same pattern, find your true love, fix all the problems. And book 3, first of all, I get to play with a very mouthy character. She's got a lot of attitude.
Yeah.
And there's a huge twist that's going to just pivot the rest of the series in a totally different direction. So that's coming out next spring, and I'm really looking forward to starting on that before the end of the year. So.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
Like you said, I've got the blog up, and I'm on Facebook as well. That's facebook.com/Schreyer author.
Okay. And your website name is, I think I said it, well, if you could just say it again so people can...
It was casiaschreyer.wordpress.com.
Right. Okay. Awesome. Well, Casia, thanks so much for sharing all your amazing tips. It's going to help a lot of listeners, I'm sure of it. So
I hope so. Thanks for having me over today.
Yes, it's been good.